So non-random sampling um, is a kind of sampling method where the goal is not necessarily for the sample to match the population. So we don't have to worry as much about sampling frame error. We do need to think about selection bias. Non-random sampling is often used because it's more cost-effective. It tends to be less generalizable, but many times it is more feasible. And sometimes it's desirable. Sometimes I don't want my sample to represent the entire population because I'm studying a very specific phenomenon, or because people who are not randomly selected can give me better data, higher data quality than people who would be selected at random. So in that case, I'm making a decision that I want the high quality data I would get from non-randomly selected individuals who have some connection to the issue at hand, as opposed to wanting to focus on external validity or generalizability by using random sampling. So both of those are valid choices that study teams make. And I think it's important, too, to be attentive to power dynamics here. So who gets to decide whether the sample is representative of the population? And who gets to decide that we need to be representative of the population? So, for example, I worked a few years ago on a participatory action project, a research project with several co-researchers, collaborators who were adults with autism. So working with my study team, we determined that we were going to interview autistic adults about an issue at hand, a community issue. And one of the critiques we got was that our sample would not be representative because we were using verbal interviews. And many individuals on the autism spectrum are not able to participate in an interview. So our sample did not match the population. We decided we were completely fine with that because we wanted to talk with autistic adults who could represent themselves, because we thought that what they had to say would be generalizable to other autistic adults who were not able to communicate verbally, but they would still have more insight than a randomly selected sample. So there's various techniques for non-random sampling. One that's commonly used is convenience sampling. So that's basically just inviting people who are convenient to you or available to you to participate. So clients in your agency, people in a waiting room. Purposive sampling is when you use your knowledge of the community or issue at hand to strategically sample the people who you think have the most information about it or are most likely to want to participate. So going back to zombies, an example of purposive sampling might be if I know from talking to zombie community leaders that zombies really enjoy mini golf as a general rule and are there's some mini golf tournaments going on that are widely followed in the zombie world, but that a lot of zombies don't like going to movies, particularly horror movies. I would then use purposive sampling to stand in front of the mini golf course and invite people to participate, because I've learned from community leaders that this is a good way to connect with undead individuals. And I wouldn't send anyone to stand in front of the movie theater. So there might be a few zombies going to the movies who aren't invited to participate, who I miss. But on balance, I've made a decision about how to most effectively connect with members of the community. Convenience sampling would be a little bit different in that you might stand on a street corner or at a polling place or library, something that the general population, a location that the general population and members of the population you want to recruit visit. Snowball sampling is when people in your study reach out to other people who might be eligible. So picture a snowball rolling down a snow-covered mountain and picking up more snow as it rolls. Snowball sampling is really effective with hard-to-find populations. Sometimes it's done indirectly, so I interview someone and then I give them a flyer about the study to share with their friends. Sometimes it's done more directly so I interview someone and I ask them to write down the names of some friends or family members who they think might be interested, and I call those people. The direct method needs to have some very careful and thoughtful protections for privacy and confidentiality, and protections against coercion built in. Snowball sampling, I think, can be a really good way to build trust with communities that have been, frankly, screwed over by researchers in the past, who have been marginalized. And I think is also a good way of building engagement with your study. So an example of this is a study I worked on of parents with intellectual disabilities. This is a population who faces a lot of oppression and a lot of inappropriate oversight from child welfare authorities, a lot of inappropriate, unfair assumptions. So members of this population, parents with intellectual disabilities, very, very validly often choose not to disclose their disability status, fearing that it might bring consequences, including loss of custody of their kids when it's, unwarranted. And so in that study, I used snowball sampling rather than asking parents to call me and essentially out themselves as having an intellectual disability. I instead asked people I'd already interviewed who saw that I was trustworthy, that I wasn't going to call DCF on an unwarranted basis, and also gave the participants I'd already interviewed kind of a voice and a choice in study participation. I also used purposive sampling for that, in that I talked with some community leaders and some insiders and got knowledge about places where it was safe for parents with intellectual disabilities to out themselves, and where they received supports, and visited things like social groups and service agencies, rather than, just standing at, for example, a WIC office and asking everyone if they had an intellectual disability and would be willing to participate, which would be convenient sampling. So in general, there are advantages and disadvantages to each sampling technique and to choosing random or non-random sampling. So in every study you read, it's important to think about how was the sample, what was the sampling method? How was the sample determined? What are the downsides of that method, and what are some sources of bias? And also, what were the advantages to that method? Why do you think it was done? And what research methods and questions match best to the different sampling techniques? In other words, what sampling technique is most appropriate for your research question and your research method? And that overall helps you make a determination about external validity or generalizability.